You're listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast, a show where a 40-year radio veteran talks to Hall of Famers, up-and-comers, legends, producers, journalists, record executives, and more to talk about music and the amazing stories behind it all. If you like what you hear today, be sure to subscribe to it, like it, rate it, follow it, share the hell out of it. You can also follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for regular updates about upcoming guests. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee. Be sure to stop by their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or stop by their website at metrojeep.com and make it Metro. And drive home in your new Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram today.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast.
On February 21st, 2021, I released an interview with Daniel Ash, formerly of Bauhaus, Tones on Tail, and Love and Rockets. In what was his very first podcast interview ever, Daniel not only talked about reuniting with his former Bauhaus bandmates David J., Kevin Haskins, and Peter Murphy, he also talked about the release of their first single in 14 years, which was called Drink New Wine. Unfortunately, the band was unable to complete a tour due to the poor health of lead singer Peter Murphy, and so the three remaining members would continue on as Love and Rockets, where they would tour the United States with Jane's Addiction. At least that was the plan. This was the very tour that ended in Boston on September 13th, 2024, when Jane's Addiction, Perry Farrell, and Dave Navarro got involved in a fistfight on stage, which ultimately ended the tour and Jane's Addiction as a band. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is that during that interview, Daniel Ash took the opportunity to announce for the very first time not only the formation of a new band that included Bruce Smith, formerly of the pop group Public Image Ltd. And the Slits, but also bass player Paul Denman, who had previously played with Sade and Sweetback. He also talked about putting the finishing touches on a new album. The name of the band would be called Ashes and Diamonds, and at the time, Daniel Ash was pretty jacked up about it. But clearly, there were some things that got in the way of its release, including the Bauhaus reunion, the Love and Rockets tour, a worldwide pandemic, and I should also point out that the other guys were pretty busy doing other stuff too. But I'll get to that in a second. Finally, after 4 years since making that announcement on Baxie's Musical Podcast, the debut album from Ashes and Diamonds is finally about to be released. The new album is called Ashes and Diamonds Are Forever, and it's set to be released on October 31st, Halloween. Now, having heard a preview of the entire album, I have to say it's pretty freaking amazing. From their first single, On a Rocka, to every other track on the record, it was totally worth the wait. My guest today is drummer Bruce Smith. As I've already mentioned, Bruce was one of the original members of the insanely influential and uniquely experimental band, the Pop Group, starting in 1979. He then joined the Slits to play on their final album, 1981's Return of the Giant Slits. He has also been a longtime member of Public Image Ltd. With John Lydon, and in fact, one of the things that kept him busy was the release of their 11th album, 2024's End of the World. But that's hardly where this story ends. Bruce has also played with the likes of the New Age Steppers, Terrance Trent Darby, the Bjork, and many others. And now, after years in the waiting, he's about to release an incredible new album with Ashes and Diamonds. It's amazing. To talk about that and his legendary career is drummer Bruce Smith on Baxie's Musical Podcast. I have to tell you, 4 years ago, I had Daniel Ash on this podcast. It was his first podcast interview, which I thought was almost unfathomable, but it was his first one.
Right.
So this goes, all the way back to 2021, and at the time, he announced that you guys were putting the finishing touches on this new record. And he expected it to come out by the end of the year or early the following year. And, of course, a lot of stuff has happened since that time. But having heard the record, I have to say it was completely worth the wait. That record is so fantastic.
Appreciate it greatly.
Yeah. And the enthusiasm, and he was talking about it just a few years ago, really kind of puts into perspective, how excited not just he is, but how all three of you are feeling about this. I read an interview where you said this is the most satisfying musical project you had done, maybe ever.
One of them, yeah. I don't know about ever, but certainly one of the most fulfilling. Yeah.
Tell me about that. What is it about? Is it about the germination of it of it all, the work that went into it?
Yes. And I think that, purely because of circumstances, that is, we wrote the bulk of it during the COVID-19 era. I mean, we started before COVID, so we had some songs, and then we kept working through COVID and put a bunch of things together through 2020 and 21. And we had the mixed and so on and so forth, but they were made piecemeal, those songs, because we never were in the same place at the same time. We weren't able to be. So what happened was, in I guess it was the late 2022, we decided, with some advice from our management team, like, why don't we just do all of this again? And let's find the best way, working with Robert Stevenson, who's a spectacularly good engineer. And we re-recorded everything in a week. So what that meant was, and by the way, we had, a little while before we went in the studio, we'd done some rehearsal because we were in Los Angeles and we were starting to think about, rehearsing to do a live show or shows. And what that did, it had this effect of like focusing everybody on, wait a minute, we should record these again with us in the same place. So that's what we did. And as I say, it's really about circumstances and the circumstances that go into making records. Unless you are working with a gargantuan budget, which is exceedingly rare these days, unless you're Miley Cyrus. And no disrespect to Miley Cyrus, she's great in my opinion. Right. So, but my point is, it was just circumstances that kind of led up to us being able to do that. And as a result, what that meant was, when we went in the studio to record the songs, each of us we were really already very much intimately engaged with the songs. We'd worked on the arrangements, we'd worked on the parts, we'd played them together, in a room. And so, I mean, most of the drum tracks are like one take, probably. Wow. Maybe two. Because I already knew, okay, I had a picture of how this was going. I wasn't trying to write the drum part, which is often the case, while you're actually making the cut. And then later you hear it back and you think, oh, yeah, well, that could have been better. I didn't really have the time to do that. And that's why I'm sort of filling you in on why it in a way, it was so rewarding, was because the circumstances gave us a chance to realize the songs and their potential.
Yeah, the other thing that comes into play here, I would assume, is you were also, I mean, all of you were also very busy doing other things in the middle of this. I mean, you obviously Daniel's reunites with Bauhaus. There's 11 Rockets tour. You had
that's right.
commitments.
That also extended this period of time to get to the point we're at now. You're absolutely correct.
Right,
yeah.
and also your commitments to PiL too. I mean, that's
right. I was on tour with PiL in the autumn of 23. Yeah.
So when you left PiL in 2024, did that free things up for you personally, or did you leave knowing that this was still going to be a project to be working on?
Well, I knew that we had recorded it. So I knew, and we had it recorded and mixed. So I knew that we were, close to being ready to actually put it out. Then, of course, there's the process of finding somebody to put it out. Also, something of an adventure in the current era, with some old geezers like us. So that took a little time too. But my departure from PiL was not exclusively because I'm doing this. It was also that, we had just done a long tour in support of the recent recording with Public Image, and the tour went very well. But I also felt as though I had kind of reached a fork in the road personally, with my involvement with that, and certainly, I mean, as far as I know, I'm the longest tenured drummer in Public Image Limited. So but there was, it was, as I say, it was my decision. It wasn't because of any sort of falling out or anything like that. It was just that I kind of thought, okay, I've done this, and I've done it for many years. And we just did a fantastic tour that hopefully and a lot of which was recorded and hopefully might see the light of day as live recording someday. But it seemed to me like a good point to then move on, you know.
I want to ask you more about PiL a little bit later on. One of the things that is interesting about the Ashes and Diamonds is, so you're talking about a process here of literally like 7 years before you guys get together for the very first time to now.
About that,
yeah, about this. Tell me how you guys even started this, because I mean, it is for all intents and purposes considered a super group. I mean, you, Daniel, and Paul. I mean, how did this even start?
Well, Paul is in a way the sort of pivotal figure here, because he and I have known each other well since we both lived in London, and when I was playing with PiL at the time, and his success with Sade was really starting to get going. So I've known him for a long time, and then we recorded together for this project Sweetback, which was released on Sony. It was a kind of spin-off. It was really the Sade band without her. So we had worked together, and so he and I have had, and known each other and worked together for a long time. And he'd known Daniel for some time. And so it's really, Paul, I think, had some conversations with Daniel about working together. And then it was either his idea or his wife's idea. And it may well have been her who said to her name is Kim, by the way. Kim may have well said to Paul, why don't they now, this could be a chance to see if you can pull Bruce in and do something together. So it was very much an idea. It just happened to work out pretty well. So as soon as we got in the studio, I'd never met Daniel.
Really?
No. So we gathered at a little studio in Los Angeles and set up and started throwing some ideas around. And it all started to gel fairly quickly, and that's the point, isn't it? Really, you kind of want to see, this isn't okay. Well, it's going to keep developing, but the way in which it gelled happened fairly organically and in a pretty uncomplicated way.
It's funny because, Daniel's history is always working fast. I mean, Bela Lugosi's Dead was a one take, and they had only been together for weeks. I mean, he's used to working pretty damn quick.
Yeah. And I've done the same too. Some of the Public Image things we've done, same thing.
Yeah.
But that too, it's a hit and miss thing, isn't it? Sometimes you capture something extraordinary. Bela Lugosi is a great example. Some of the earlier Public Image recordings or pop recordings are great examples of capturing something extraordinary that is probably not repeatable in that particular manner. But it doesn't always work out. The other side of that is when you're working quickly, sometimes, it's a good idea, but it doesn't feel like we really got the chance to really figure it out. And I feel as though on this occasion, we did have, because of the circumstances to us, we were able to really work the music into something that everybody felt really very confident about.
Yeah. Yeah, the end result is pretty remarkable. Like I said, the first single, On a Rocket, is apparently a late addition to the record. But I mean, you guys could have picked any number of songs as a first single. Boy or Girl, Setting Yourself Up to Love. I mean, there's like one great track after another. Tell me about that one and why you guys chose to release that first.
Probably because it's kind of a statement, and I'm sure in some quarters we've probably received criticism for having, 4 lines: on a rocket, on a roller, red hot, white hot. Those are the only lyrics. I personally love that about it. There's some sort of element of this sort of, it's very modern, but it has this kind of almost sort of glam type quality to it, which again, that is an era where Daniel and Paul and I are all pretty close in age, and our teenage years are all in England in the sort of glam rock into punk rock and so on. So we're all pretty much in the same area. So that's an interesting, I think, point I should make as to why perhaps we do have this ease in which we are able to create together is that we all have a fairly shared back musical experience from when we were quite young that we kind of is pretty formative into what we've done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that is a sort of cultural experience that we all kind of share it.
You know, one of the things that hits me when I'm listening to the record, and you know, I've played drums since the age of 12, poorly, but I've played drums since the age of 12. So automatically, I'm listening to drums and bass in this thing, and one of the things that leaps out at me is how locked in you and Paul are in on this record. You know, and it's always impressed me going back and listening to all this, you know, all the old records I have of you playing. You've always played with this impeccable groove and always seem to have improved year after year, going all the way back from the pop group and beyond. Tell me about playing with Paul specifically in this particular project.
Well, Paul is, you know, he's just a spectacular bass player because he just knows where things go in terms of landing a feel, you know?
Yeah.
He doesn't overplay. He's not interested in trying to dazzle you with his technique. In fact, what he wants to do is to bring you in, you being the listener and myself, with a kind of captivating and generally quite melodic bass line, some of which, as you know, have resulted in some giant hit records.
Yeah, right.
In some of those Sade tunes, the bass line is what you sing afterwards. Actually, no disrespect to her, but that's what's really memorable. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, and again, I think without having to explain it, I think we have a lot of grounding, both of us, in reggae music, and that kind of informs a lot of how we play. Which again is where pattern is really important. And the pattern and essentially is more important than any of the flash technique that you want to shove. And Paul, like myself, he plays for the singer, or for the song.
Right.
The idea is that the bass and drums are really carrying the song. And if they're distracting you from the song, then we're doing something wrong. And so we both play together in that kind of way. Yeah.
But there's a particular groove and a feel that you've always had. I mean, I think back to like the song Seattle with PiL. You know, there's a great cadence to what you're playing in that song. And while it may seem simple to some people, try playing that. You know, most drummers would probably stumble through that, but it does fit the song with such, the word I'm thinking is just graceful. And I think that's the way you've always played. And the cadence of that song was a great track. And I've always been impressed with the way you play.
What you're saying, is that some of those things, as is the case with some of the Ashes and Diamonds songs, they actually start with the drum beat.
Yeah. So
the pattern of the drums, the other players are then listening to that. We can, either Daniel or in the case of writing with John, who's very attuned to the drum pattern. So he's going to listen to the pattern and go, yeah, so I'm going to fit in here and here so that those accents in the drum pattern, that we're working together,
You grew up in a pretty artistic background. Your dad was a prominent artist, Hassel Smith. And I would assume that, that some of that leads into, a certain amount of creativity, just growing up in an environment like that. How do you think that affected the way you approached music, living in a situation where art and creativity is so much a part of your upbringing?
Profoundly. First of all, my parents supported me. They weren't crazy about the idea that I was leaving school at age 17 to start making records, which I did start doing at that point. But I remember my dad saying to me, he said, okay, if this is what you want to do, we're with you. He said, just please learn as much about what it is you're doing as you possibly can. Because I'm sure they were concerned, he's not going to have as many options as if he goes through a university education and so on and so forth. And that's true. They were right about that.
Yeah.
But that piece of advice of really learning a lot about, the shall we say, the techniques and rudiments of modern drumming, constantly evolving, was absolutely on point. And then later on in my life, there was a period I was living in London, and I was doing a lot of writing and production for TV commercials. And which was great. I was making some money. I was actually learning a lot more about another field of making music, which was especially producing commercials, which is fast, and how to get it done quickly, how to use the money the right way, and so on and so forth. But at one point in that period, I remember having a conversation with my dad, and he said, he's like, yeah, Bruce, yeah, it's great. He said, but let's just make one thing clear. You're not making art. There may be an art in what you're doing, but you are delivering something that someone has said, we want it to be like this, this, and this. And there are, in a lot of scenarios, Michael, when you're making TV commercials, it's fairly plagiaristic. They've probably got a track that they've cut their film to, and they're like, we want it like that. They just aren't going to pay whoever it was the track to you. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I totally understand. Yes.
And so that piece of advice, it helped to steer my path, in that I realized that, yes, that's right. I'm getting more experience and more information here, but actually it helped me to not forsake, the fact that, okay, but we're really, what I want to really do is continue to make powerful and original music.
Well, thank God you got that advice, because I think most parents would have said, paintbrushes are a whole lot quieter than a set of drums, and less expensive too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I do want to talk about some of the other things that you've done. We talked a little bit about PiL. We'll get back to that in a minute. But the pop group, I think, is one of those bands that maybe not enough people really know about them, but the influence of the pop group is really immeasurable. And in a way, the pop group also kind of influenced John Lydon early on in PiL too, because a lot of that seems to have replicated, and especially in some of those earlier records with him in that group. How do you see the pop group's influence?
Well, if everybody who claims to have been at a pop group show in the late 70s, I mean, it was only a few years we played for, was there, we would have been playing to many thousands of people.
Sure.
We were not playing to thousands of people, hundreds. But that's just one example of how many people I think were influenced by it. I had an experience not long ago. We were rehearsing in Los Angeles, and in the studio, in the same set of rehearsal rooms, the guys from Jane's Addiction, I guess Porno for Pyros, like a spinoff for that, they were rehearsing there. And Mike Watt, who I'd met before, and I went in to say hello, and Mike turned to the other guys who were playing, and he was like, this is the drummer from the pop group. So funny. They were like, what? And it was so funny because, I don't expect that, you know what I mean? But they were so blown away.
Yeah.
And from that, I realized, wow, it had really have a far-reaching effect, some of that music on people, And I think in reference to what you're saying about the early parts of PiL, whether it's hard to say whether, in fact, they, Levine and Wobble and John had heard. I'm sure they had heard the pop group, but this is an interesting point. We were collectively, and obviously John moved very seriously away from what the Sex Pistols were about. The Sex Pistols were a great rock and roll band, but it was a rock and roll band. Public Image is not a rock and roll band. The pop group was not a rock and roll band. And along with other music of that time period that has stood the test of time, it's definitely not rock and roll. People were really making a concerted effort to move away from that character, those chord changes, both in London, in New York, all over the place. So, those records were made at a similar time when people were, and I think possibly you're right. I think we did hear, other bands at the time. I can remember hearing, I don't know, Cabaret Voltaire or Joy Division,
Yeah.
thinking, oh, wow, they're up to something too, aren't they? Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying? And you don't necessarily think, oh, I'm going to copy that, but you think, yeah, they're working a similar kind of path of trying to steer away from, as I say, from more traditional rock and roll forms.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that in the Gang of Four. Nick Cave, cites you guys as an influence. I mean, I hear the pop group in Gang of Four, and in the same way that they were danceable, it's the same way where you guys. It was not a rock band, but again, there was groove, there was danceability in some of that, in spite of all the experimentation that was going on there.
And that again, I think that speaking about Ashes and Diamonds, I would hope that through younger people hearing this, and I'm sure they will in some way, and then realizing what our recorded history is, and perhaps then referencing back to some recordings that they may well have never heard.
Yeah.
And that bringing, there's, as it were, bringing that to a younger audience, and also the cultural importance of that. You know what I'm saying? And the fact that there was a period of time when those recordings had a really pretty profound effect on popular culture. They still are, actually.
Yeah.
It's still going on. Yeah.
So a couple of things are occurring to me as you mentioned the Jane's Addiction story. I'm kind of laughing in my head because here we are many years later, and it was Jane's Addiction that would ruin Daniel's tour with Love and Rockets. So there's a full circle thing going on there.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, whenever a band comes out, or any artist really, because it didn't have to necessarily be music, and they're doing something new and very experimental, you sometimes wonder how it's going to be received by an audience or fans or whatever.
Sure.
With the pop group, I mean, it was such a non-traditional band. There was so much going on in there that was very avant-garde. When you were playing to those hundreds of people, what was the reaction to the pop group early on?
Well, Mike, that's a great question. And I can tell you that there was one occasion where we were asked to open up for the Stranglers on a couple of dates. They were on tour, and we opened up for, and it was a full house. The Stranglers were, I think their first record was doing well. And it was still a period when, if you would go to a show of the Stranglers or perhaps the Clash, and if or Buzzcocks or whatever, the audience, there would be a sort of group of punk rockers near the front. Most of the other people would be, there's a lot of sort of student things. Often those shows were at student venues, and sort of people who were just sort of interested but didn't really know what the hell was going on. The core audience, my point being, was pretty small, right? Anyway, we played at the Stranglers at this one show, and when we finished, it was basically silent. Nobody clapped. Nobody did anything. They were so stunned by how radical it was, I think, that they didn't even know how to respond.
No,
it was great. We loved it.
When you're opening up for a band like the Stranglers, did they want you to have a reaction going? Were you there to warm up the crowd, or were you there just to cool it off and splash water all over the place?
Well, and that was one occasion that I remember vividly, because there was it was just nothing. I mean, it was stunned silence, essentially. And then there were a few other occasions. I mean, when we would, obviously that was unique because we were playing to a Stranglers crowd, but when we do our own shows, of course, once we'd made a record, and again, some people actually were familiar with the songs, that, helped a bit. But when we'd play live, there was no guarantee that it would sound anything like the record. I mean, it has to be critically stated here that maybe She Is Beyond Good and Evil would sound kind of like the record, but still most of it would still be pretty expressive. And, as I say, so there was a feeling that it was really a moment in time. And I think obviously at that point, we weren't using any track or any playback stuff. And our musicianship was fairly limited, really, considering what we were trying to do. What we were trying to do was way in excess of what we were truly capable of, but that didn't really bother us. And so, yeah. So what I'm saying is, it was always going to be an experience in that moment for the audience, you know, and it was unlikely that you were going to go home thinking, yeah, well, I was singing along with that one. And so, you know, because Mark would just be, you know, wild and screaming at the audience. And when it was really cohesive and powerful, and it often was, I mean, that you know, during the set, you would probably not get a whole bunch of response, but then when you finished, you would find that people were like absolutely enwrapped in what was going on, and then would be really enthusiastic. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
So how would you compare that experience to then playing with the Slits? Because you at one point you were playing with both simultaneously.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in some, it wasn't not that different, in that although I would say that after their first album cut, it meant that they had quite, you know, well arranged songs, and by and large we would play those arrangements. But Ariana, too, the singer, extraordinary person, she was not necessarily willing to allow herself to just be boxed into, okay, we're just going to play this 3 minutes and it's going to go like that.
Right.
So again, it could often depart this way, that way, and you know, and have elements that you know would really have no idea what was going to happen. But again, you know, what the way playing for the Slits was, it was the music, again, was pretty firmly, because of Dennis's production, pretty firmly rooted in reggae by and large.
Sure.
So my and Budgie, who went on, you know, played for Susie and the Banshees after that, he plays on that record. And so the drum parts were probably a combination of Dennis and then you know, Budgie's ideas. So they were they'd honed those parts down. Hot Group was much wilder, you know. But it made for a great experience. I remember doing those tours where I'd play both sets. It was fantastic. Yeah.
So with Ariana's relationship with John, obviously there's a family connection between the two of them. How did you get involved with John and PiL?
Well, you are exactly right. That I'd first met John, I think, because of my working with Ari and her mom, and John lived together as a couple. So I remember, going to the house in Battersea on one occasion, and John was there, and it was kind of like, and then there were some other mutual friends. He used to have this crazy house on a street called Gunter Grove in West London. It's down off the King's Road. And that was a crazy place. And I think I remember going there on a couple of times in the middle of the night. He didn't really say much to me. It was more like, just a sort of, oh, all right then. Well, yeah, that was about it, But I think what cemented it was that it coincidentally at that time, John's manager was a guy named Keith Borton, who lived in London. And after making album in New York with Bill Laswell and an incredible cast of players, he came to London, and Keith, who was his manager, helped him to gather musicians to play live, to do a tour. And so it was right place, right time, really, Michael. It was kind of like, well, I'm representing Bruce, and his work, and you've probably met before. How about that? So we gave it a try. Yeah. We actually did a TV show, I think, with two drummers. Hugo Burnham was the other drummer.
Oh, yeah.
There's a recording of us playing Rise on the famous Top of the Pops TV show. And it has two drummers. It's Hugo and I. And John McGeoch, the late and great John McGeoch. And actually, maybe it isn't McGeoch. Maybe it's Kevin something or other, who was a fine guitar player. because I think Kevin was maybe going to be the first guitar player, and then he had another commitment. But I do remember that if you could probably find it, it's certainly, I remember it because Hugo and I are basically playing the drum parts together.
That's awesome. I mean, that's awesome. Actually, Hugo lives here in Massachusetts, just, probably like 90 minutes away from me. So
Okay.
I've had him on here a couple of times. Actually, it's interesting that you brought up McGeoch. I've also interviewed Rory Sullivan Burke, who is the guy that did the biography of John McGeoch, The Light Pours Out of Me. And it's a great book, and he did a really, really good job with it. But McGeoch is one of these guys, or was one of these guys whose name pops up all the time, and maybe is still undervalued by the enormity of that guy's talent. Maybe one of the best guitar players of that era. I think he's like one of those guys that people should educate themselves on, because the creativity of that guy was just enormous.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to some of those Susie and the Banshee songs that he co-wrote, it's really good. I mean, it's and again, it's just as we were discussing it with regard to moving away from rock and roll, changes. He was absolutely doing the same part of that, of really working hard to, I've heard that before. Yeah, and we're not going to do that. We're going to push a little harder into something else that, that we haven't heard before. And John was really good at that. And he had some great, he had some great musicianship too. It wasn't by accident.
No, absolutely not.
The pop group to some degree was.
Yeah, but not McGeoch, whether it was whether in Magazine or PiL or anything else that the guy wound up doing. We talked a little bit about you leaving PiL, and as you said, you probably worked with John Lydon longer than many of the people that were in that band. Obviously, in the last few years, he's gone through an awful lot, and and tragically. But I've always felt, and maybe you can you can back me up on this or choose not to, that in many ways, John Lydon went from being public enemy #1 to suddenly a national treasure in the course of like 15 years. He's an extraordinary guy who is prone to outrageous honesty. Tell me a little bit about working with him and about the relationship you had with him.
Well, or outrageous dishonesty. I've been in an interview with him when questioned on something that he'd said. He just looked at the interview and he said, "I lied. I made it up." What are you going to say? Yeah, because and he's someone who he basically does exactly what he wants to do. You are right. His honesty, by and large, is extraordinary, and he is in the context that we're now in. And I've done a lot of interviews with him. He's extraordinary because he's to the point, and he doesn't blather on too much. He makes it brief, and that's it. He's very good at communicating his ideas in really crystalline sentences. We have had for many years a really amazing, a really great working relationship. In that, do I want to hang out with him on my night off? No. He's quite a challenging person to be with, but that's the point. Therein lies the point, in that there's a lot of push and pull and dynamic, and his expectations are very high. And so as I say, our relationship has been about making music, and also in a live context. And again, playing with John, you never know what's going to happen from one night to the next. So you need to stay very concentrating on what he's doing, so that everybody in the band is connected. They're looking to me, I'm looking to him, and that's the same with any great front person, really, or any front person at all. Is that to give them the latitude to make a performance that's outside of the arranged or ordained things is really important. And I've played with a lot of really amazing front people. I played with Dennis Brown, same thing. Again, we had the arrangements, but right in there, he'd say, and he'd go off into something else. Just stay with that bit. Let me, right. I'll let you know when we're moving on. Okay, give me a fill there, or whatever it is, So So my departure from PiL had absolutely no bearing on any negative relationship with John. Far from it. I mean, I think he's really something else.
Yeah.
It's just
So the new album is coming out, and I remember when we talked to Daniel, there was some talk about the excitement of maybe even getting on the road with this. Is that part of the plan?
Oh yeah, we'll get there. I think we'd like to hopefully, over the next few months, get, as it were, shake the tree a little bit and create. It's a bit of an adventure. The three of us have collectively made a lot of records, and I think it's a great story. It's still a new project and a new band and new music. So it has no audience at present, and so I think hopefully over the next few months, maybe between now and towards the end of the year, once people have heard the music, it starts to make some waves, then we'll look at playing some shows.
That's great. Bruce, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate the time you gave me today. Like I said, the record is fantastic. You really should be proud of it.
I really appreciate hearing that. Thank you. That's what we need. I mean, it's really excellent.
Well, I appreciate it. Bruce, great to meet you. Best of luck, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Thank you, Michael. It's much appreciated. Let's be in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Bruce. The name of the new album with Bruce, Daniel, and Paul is called Ashes and Diamonds Are Forever. It'll be out on Halloween. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks again to Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram at Chicopee for their support, but most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.